Hi, I'm Alex Gosse, owner of Magically Resin and working in collaboration with Craft Resin this year to bring you guys some new ideas of how to use your craft resin in so many fun and creative ways. And I love doing this for holidays. I found this super cute gnome door hanger at Dollar Tree. And I wasn't ever quite sure what I wanted to do with it. I knew I wanted to jazz it up some, but I wasn't sure how, and I wasn't sure exactly which season I wanted this to be for, because I really like to change out my sign on my door for every season. So I decided this would be a perfect Easter festive spring shamrocky kind of feel, because all of that kind of comes together at once. And I am thrilled with how this turned out. It's just adorable, and this was just the most fun little project, so I wanted to share this with y'all. So I'm starting off by mixing iridescent glitter, a couple drops of emerald alcohol ink, and clear kids school glue. Just basic school glue, but it's clear, because I wanted to be able to see the leaves in this, and I wanted to know that you could see the leaves. I didn't want to wait, which it would take if I did Duraclear. I wouldn't be able to see the leaves for sure and know that enough of them had landed on top. So Duraclear would work for this. A lot of other things would work for this. The downside to using any kind of school glue is there a chance that it yellows, but in this case, because of the alcohol ink, I wasn't concerned about that at all. So what I'm doing is I'm just painting a border around the edge. I liked the tiki around the edge, but I thought it would be so much more fun and bright and festive if I brought in the shamrock feel around the edge, and boy is it. The leaves in it, the glitter, oh, it's so sparkly. And the sign is really big, by the way. So the filming of this is tricky. So if some of the footage seems off, it's because the sign is so large. But I thought it was way too cute and perfect for the season and for what I wanted to impart and to show you this technique, which I think could be so valuable in a bunch of different ways. At its core, what I'm doing is I'm building a glue and glitter barrier, and then I'm going to put the resin on the inside, and ideally I'm hoping to hold all the resin inside of the reservoir, but because the sign wasn't flat, it pulled at one spot and it did pour off some. But by and large, if what you're working on is completely flat, this technique should work perfectly. And I could have waited and done a second layer of glitter, which would have made a pretty high wall. But I was doing this on my work surface. I wasn't super concerned if some resin leaked out. But what I wanted it to do was keep most of the resin that I poured on top, and it worked perfectly for that. So play around with this idea of making a reservoir out of glitter and glue or glitter and resin. Just, it needs to be thick enough that it leaves a wall, that it leaves something substantial enough that it will stop the resin. So this is a great technique. I use this all the time, and because the sign wasn't flat, you'll see here in a minute that some of the resin does leak out, but it's completely fine. And it's not a lot that leaks out, and mostly it worked perfectly. What I want the green to look like around the edge is something like a vine or something like ivy. So if I'd wanted this to be a straight line, I could have taped it, and then it would have been a very straight glitter line once I pulled up the tape. But I didn't want it to do that. I actually wanted it to be very willy-nilly and free-flowing, like a vine might be that was wrapped around it. And so it's somewhere in my mind of the color of a shamrock, but the reflection and the feel of it being encased by a vine, because the whole thing just feels so happy and fun and springy, and I feel very happy and fun and springy right now. So it turns out that I didn't mix enough, which is not surprising. I mean, it's hard to know how much you're going to need for this project. So when I started to remix, I put in the alcohol ink first, and I realized that I could add a beautiful level of variation by just pulling through some of the darker, more pronounced alcohol ink because I hadn't mixed in any more glitter. And I thought that was really cool. So it gave this wonderful level of depth and variation by using the same color of alcohol ink with different amounts, different drops of alcohol ink in different amounts of glue and a smaller amount of glitter. So now I feel good about how much dark I've gotten around the edges, so I need to mix the next part so that I can finish up the top. So I add a little bit of alcohol to my clear school glue to make it dry faster, and that's wonderful in most cases, but I noticed here that it was actually drying fast enough that I was concerned that the part that I'd already laid down would not still be tacky in order for me to attach some of the leaves on the very top. So I thought, since it was a decent stopping point anyway, that I would go ahead and finish up this part and then basically just redo the top with the same idea while it was still really tacky so that the leaves would stick to the tacky glue. Then I pulled out my heat gun and I blew the excess really mostly into the glue, and also dried up some of it all the way, because what I didn't want is for any of the leaves to come into the resin once I moved to that part. So I wanted to make sure that all of the leaves, the glitter leaves, were all certainly solidly attached to something sticky. So now I'm just finishing up the top and doing exactly the same technique that I did before. I would have done all of this if I'd made the right amount of glitter in the first place. But I like to really load on the glitter, so it's impossible to know how much you're going to need to do a barrier type thing like this. And it was no problem to remix some others, and that inspired me to add that other layer of darker, deeper color, more saturated color, I suppose, and darker. And that ended up being such a lovely effect in many colors of foliage happening. So I gave this 24 hours to dry to make sure that school glue glitter mixture was very, very well dry. I did not want this wet at all before I poured the resin in. And then I mixed up my craft resin 1-to-1 ratio, and I let it sit for 15 minutes before I poured it because I wanted it to thicken up just a little bit. And I always split a little bit of it into a little wine stopper because I don't want it to flash cure. I always want to have just a extra bit left over. So, and then I turn everything over in a napkin holder because it ends up being exactly the perfect size to hold my cup so that none of my resin gets wasted. And I'm making sure that it reaches all the sides, using the heat gun to push it around because I don't want to scratch the surface, since the surface is paper, and the resin does make the paper a little bit vulnerable for a while. So I'm very careful with anything that I'm doing with paper. I purposefully did not seal this paper. I like the depth that you gain from resin when it goes on certain paper, and I know how Dollar Tree signs work. So I like that it does that. If you don't want it to affect the paper, be sure and seal it with Mod Podge or spray acrylic. There's a lot of ways to seal it, and there's a bunch of videos on YouTube on how to do that. So I'm not super concerned about the top of this being very pristine. I want to make sure all of it is covered with resin, but I am about to hit this with a glitter stick and add glitter glass to all the gnome caps because I can, and it's fun. And just what a great opportunity to play with creative fun these signs provide. And it was $1, and it really doesn't take very much resin either. So I'm loading this up with an alcohol ink, a glittery alcohol ink that I make myself. And so you'll notice it starts to get very glittery fast. And here comes the glitter glass. So I'm putting glitter glass on each of the gnome hats, and I will put links in the description for all of the products that I use. I'm a huge fan of this glitter glass, and it is very hit or miss to find, but it's a really fun little product. If you do use it, by and large, it's not sharp, but you can get cut from this. So be very careful if you're using any glass products, even if they're supposed to have the edges off. It's glass. You can still get one stuck in your finger and it's like a splinter and it hurts. So this is the end result of my super cute shamrocky Easter spring sign, and I could not be happier. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you spending your time with me. Have a fantastic day.